Imagine that you are going on a long trip to visit your relatives or friends in a neighboring city. Today, all you need to do is order a taxi and comfortably travel to the nearest train station or airport. But in the Middle Ages, you would have had to cross a vast, wild, and completely unpredictable forest. This green mass of old trees held more threats than any modern war zone. People literally wrote their wills before simply stepping outside the safe and sturdy city gates.
Survival in those harsh times was not just a nice word from a popular TV show.
It was a daily, exhausting, and very cruel calculation of preserving one's own life. The chances of not returning home from a routine trading trip were catastrophically high. Nature had not yet been conquered by man. It completely dictated its own ruthless, primitive rules. And any violation of these rules was instantly punished with the most severe measure of punishment, without the right to appeal. Sounds like a big exaggeration to create unnecessary intrigue before the story begins, right?
But dry historical facts prove that the forest was a real natural death factory for inexperienced travelers.
In this video, we will take a detailed look at the 10 main reasons for this terrifying and frightening historical phenomenon. You will learn why a simple walk through the thicket inevitably turned into a one-way ticket, and you will understand why modern people cannot even begin to imagine the real scale of those forest dangers. Today, we are used to smooth asphalt, navigation on our phones, and bright signs at every intersection. But in the Middle Ages, trade routes were often just dirty, barely visible trails. They were instantly overgrown with bushes or completely washed away by heavy spring rains. Because of this, you could easily lose your way and get lost in this green prison forever. Sounds like a common nuisance during a weekend mushroom hunt, doesn't it? But let's think about what it meant to lose your way in the harsh 13th century. You have no compass, and the sun is reliably hidden behind the dense crowns of centuries-old oaks. My modern brain starts to panic after just 5 minutes without a stable cell phone signal. But the ancient traveler knew that one wrong step would take him miles deeper into completely wild territory. Why didn't people just cut new wide roads between large cities and villages? Because cutting a path through virgin forest with hand axes is truly a titanic and expensive task. The Romans built magnificent stone highways, but by the Middle Ages, these useful technologies had been safely forgotten. It seems as if they were simply too lazy to maintain the country's basic infrastructure. In reality, local rulers simply did not have the money or human resources to do so.
And this is where historical reality becomes truly frightening and interesting to study.
Instead of roads, people navigated by broken branches or special notches on tree trunks. Imagine that your route to work depends on whether an old stump at a turn has rotted away. Modern couriers often complain about the confusing courtyards in our huge residential areas. Medieval merchants literally played Russian roulette with geography every time they left the city gates. Many forest trails were not made by humans, but by migrating herds of large wild animals. Walking along such a trail meant inevitably coming to a watering hole or straight into the lair of a dangerous predator. It was a kind of ancient lottery where the main prize was your own life. Today, specialized engineers spend many years designing safe highways. Back then, the chief engineer was a random deer that decided to take a walk through the thicket in search of fresh grass. But why couldn't he just walk in a straight line, guided by the stars in the night sky? Because the medieval forest was so dense that at night there was absolute impenetrable darkness. You literally couldn't see your own hand if you held it close to your frightened face. Modern scientists call this condition sensory deprivation, and it drives people crazy incredibly quickly. And the traveler had to sit for hours in this emptiness, sincerely hoping to live to see the dawn. Modern science has long proven that a blindfolded person always walks in circles. In a dense forest, the effect was exactly the same due to the complete absence of clear visual landmarks.
Travelers wandered through the thicket all day long until they fell to the ground from complete exhaustion.
It was very similar to a nightmare where you run with all your might, but remain in the same place. Only waking up in your warm, safe bed was completely impossible, no matter how much you wanted to. The result of the lack of roads was extremely simple and incredibly cruel to every traveler. The forest turned into a giant, confusing natural maze with no chance of escape. Thousands of people disappeared, and their bleached remains were found only decades later. By modern standards, such horrific statistics would cause global international panic. For the people of that time, it was just another good reason to write a will before visiting relatives. If you get stuck here, you're bound to meet people who are constantly on the run from the law. I often see people with the status of outlaws, exiles, and military deserters in historical records. They form vicious gangs and will kill you without hesitation for your clothes, provisions, or a few coins. Modern films romanticize Robin Hood, turning forest bandits into noble fighters for justice. But the historical reality was much dirtier, bloodier, and left no chance for a peaceful outcome. Who became a ruthless forest robber in those incredibly harsh times? Most often, they were former mercenaries who were simply forgotten to be paid after another bloody war. They took their weapons, went into the thicket, and began robbing random unarmed passersby. Today, a fired manager writes an angry post on social media and goes looking for a new job. A medieval fired mercenary took a crossbow and went to collect his severance pay on the forest roads. And here's what's really scary about these perfectly planned forest bandit ambushes.
The bandits didn't just wait on the road. They set up complex systems of tripwires and traps.
You could trip over an invisible rope, and in a second, a deadly hail of arrows would rain down on you. Modern special forces spend a long time studying similar tactics for guerrilla warfare in wooded areas. And these guys use them completely intuitively, just to avoid dying of cold and hunger. Why didn't the Royal Regular Army simply clear the forests of these armed criminals? Because searching for a group of trained people in thousands of square kilometers of windfall is pure madness. Heavily armed knights on horseback were completely useless in the dense and impenetrable thickets. It was like a foolish attempt to catch a mosquito in a dark room with a huge iron sledgehammer. The bandits knew every path perfectly and disappeared into the shadows at the slightest danger to their lives. It sounds crazy, but sometimes the robbers created entire hidden shadow settlements in the forest. They built deep dugouts, started families, and lived completely autonomously for many years. It was like a modern ghost town, only populated by desperate and armed thugs. Local peasants often traded with them, buying looted goods at huge discounts. It was a kind of medieval darknet where goods were delivered to the buyer directly from the depths of the forest.
For an ordinary merchant, a sudden encounter with such a gang was tantamount to bankruptcy and death.
They hired armed guards, but this only greatly increased the cost of transporting goods. Modern logistics takes into account the costs of gasoline, insurance, and depreciation of freight transport. 13th century logistics included the probability that the entire caravan would be slaughtered in the forest. Your boring office job requires a degree, and there are far fewer real risks there. Interestingly, the tactics of bandit attacks were honed to absolute military precision. First, they killed the horses to block the narrow path and create panic among the guards. Then skilled archers knocked the guards out of their hiding places without engaging in dangerous close combat. They acted in unison, like a professional sports team in a decisive final match. The only difference was that instead of a gold cup, they got your bag of cheap grain. As a result, the forest became a zone where the laws of humanity completely ceased to function. It was not the kindest or most righteous traveler who survived, but the most cunning, quickest, and cruelest. If you entered the thicket without a dozen strong guys with swords, you yourself became a target. It was a cruel economy of survival that did not forgive even the slightest foolish naivety, and your life was worth exactly as much as your pockets weighed in gold equivalent. I must warn you that this forest is by no means free land belonging to anyone. In fact, it belongs entirely to the local powerful lord, or even the king himself. If you try to escape starvation and kill a deer, you will be judged by the harsh forest laws. This will inevitably result in blindness, the cutting off of a hand, or public execution in the square. It sounds like a cruel dystopia, but it was the everyday nightmare reality of English peasants. Why were the rulers so fanatical about protecting ordinary trees and wild animals from their own people? Because the forest was the equivalent of a modern elite private country club for the king. Hunting was considered a noble sport, excellent training before war, and an important status privilege. Letting hungry commoners with bows and arrows into the forest was like letting homeless people onto a golf course. The authorities spent more on protecting these hunting grounds than on guarding the country's borders. You didn't even have the right to simply collect fallen wood in the vast royal forest. Modern people calmly go out into nature, grill kebabs, and chop dry branches for the barbecue. In the Middle Ages, the royal court would gladly have cut off your fingers for such behavior. Local residents were forced to buy special expensive licenses just for the right to collect fallen wood. It was the first official tax on walking in the wild in world history.
An entire army of forest officials was created to control all this legal madness.
They received a good percentage of the fines, so they fined everyone with great enthusiasm. Modern traffic inspectors would seem like angels to you compared to these guys. Foresters could break into your house and turn it upside down, looking for hidden deer meat. The presumption of innocence in forestry matters did not work at all. Everyone was guilty. The penalties for poaching were often much more severe than for killing an ordinary person. Killing a neighbor in a drunken brawl was cheaper than accidentally shooting a royal stag. The life of a wild animal with a metaphorical crown on its head was valued more highly than the life of an honest taxpayer. Today, radical animal rights activists would applaud such an approach to the conservation of rare species. But back then, it was done solely for the selfishness of one rich man with a golden crown. It sounds strange, but sometimes desperate peasants deliberately formed large gangs of poachers. They put on masks, painted their faces with black charcoal, and went on mass illegal hunts. It was not just a search for food, but a form of powerful social protest against state tyranny.
In essence, it was a medieval analog of a strike, only instead of paper posters, they used crossbows.
Naturally, the local authorities suppressed such popular uprisings with maximum demonstrative cruelty. The laws were so complex and confusing that the average person violated them every second. Did you take a bow with you for self-defense against wolves during your journey? You are now an official poacher. Did your cow accidentally stray across an invisible line of stones in search of grass? Pay a huge, unaffordable fine. It was the perfect corrupt system for replenishing the royal treasury out of thin air. As a result, the forest became a place where you could be killed not only by bandits or wolves. The state itself turned the thicket into an area of maximum legal risk for any casual traveler. You had to be terrified of every crack of a branch under your feet and every patrol. Modern bureaucracy simply gets on our nerves with long queues for certificates. Medieval forest bureaucracy literally chopped off people's heads for taking the wrong Sunday walk. When night falls, I can clearly hear the howling of hungry packs very close to me. Wild nature here is a real threat, not a pretty picture from a biology textbook. Wolves, bears, and huge wild boars are not afraid of unarmed people at all. If you travel alone without reliable weapons and a bright campfire, you will very quickly become their prey. In those days, predators had not yet learned that humans were the dominant apex of the food chain. Let's start with wolves because they were the main nightmare of the dark night forest. In winter, when small game became scarce, packs of wolves began to actively hunt travelers. Today, we only see these animals in safe zoos or beautiful documentaries. For medieval man, the wolf was a real demon, coming out of the darkness for fresh meat. One bite meant a deep laceration, rapid infection, and inevitable painful death in the forest. But do you know what was even more dangerous and completely unpredictable than a pack of hungry wolves? An ordinary wild boar, weighing nearly 200 kilograms of pure muscle and rage. This armored machine of bristles and sharp fangs could rip open a horse's belly with a single blow. Modern hunters go after boars with powerful rifles and long-range optical sights. A medieval traveler had only a short wooden club and his own uncontrollable panic. Bears also posed a tremendous threat, especially if you accidentally wandered into their territory. They could run as fast as a horse and climb even the tallest trees with ease. Escaping from an enraged bear in a dense forest was virtually impossible for a human. You couldn't outsmart an animal that had evolved over hundreds of years, specifically for hunting in the thicket. Your chances of survival rapidly dropped to zero with every passing second. How did people protect themselves from this aggressive and ubiquitous, dangerous fauna? The only reliable means of salvation at night was a huge, brightly burning hot fire. Animals are genetically afraid of fire, so the light provided a weak illusion of temporary safety. But maintaining the fire required dry wood, which had to be sought in complete darkness. If the fire accidentally went out in the rain, your problems instantly became fatal. The most terrifying moment was the complete silence before the start of a real rapid attack. Predators can sneak up completely silently, blending perfectly with the thick shadows of old trees. You are just walking calmly along the path when suddenly a huge gray shadow bursts out of the bushes. Today we fear robbers in the dark alleys of residential areas. Our ancestors feared creatures that were faster, stronger, and armed with huge sharp fangs. Many travelers wore special protective amulets made from bear claws around their necks. They sincerely believed that the spirit of a strong animal would scare away other dangerous forest predators. Of course, a hungry wolf couldn't care less about your silly magical souvenirs. It was just a psychological sedative, an ancient primitive equivalent of a pill for severe stress. It helped until the first real encounter with a ferocious and hungry beast. As a result, people perceived the forest as a foreign, hostile, and deadly dangerous territory. People entered it not as brave masters of nature, but as uninvited and vulnerable guests. Predators set their own rules here, and any violation of these rules was punished immediately. Attempting to walk through the forest without preparation was a form of sophisticated and prolonged suicide, and wild animals were happy to help travelers complete this ill-advised step. I feel the temperature drop sharply as soon as the thick tree crowns block out the sun. Without reliable shelter, you will suffer severely from severe hypothermia throughout your body. The forest traps the icy moisture, creating the effect of a giant natural refrigerator. And it is almost impossible to build a life-saving fire from wet branches in the pouring rain. The weather became as merciless a serial killer as the hungry wild wolves. The clothing of that time was completely unsuitable for survival in such extreme conditions. People wore ordinary woolen linen, which instantly absorbed water in heavy rain. Modern tourists use smart membrane jackets that repel moisture and retain precious heat. A medieval traveler in a wet woolen cloak instantly weighed 10 kilograms more, and that wet cloak slowly but surely drained the last remnants of life from him. When night frost set in, the situation spiraled out of control. The temperature could drop rapidly below zero, turning deep puddles into solid ice. Your toes would start to go numb, and you would gradually lose the ability to walk. Modern doctors call this first-degree frostbite, requiring immediate warmth and care. In the Middle Ages, it was called, "You'll just fall asleep under a bush and never wake up again." Why couldn't you build a shelter and wait out the heavy rain inside a dry shelter? Because building a normal shelter takes time, effort, and dry building materials. If you got caught in an ice storm at dusk, you simply didn't have those valuable resources. Trying to sleep on wet ground guaranteed you would have severe pneumonia by morning, and pneumonia in the 13th century was a 100% death sentence with no right of appeal. In dense forests, there is also the constant problem of so-called drizzle. Even when the downpour has completely ended, the trees continue to shed water for several more hours. You walk under a constant cold shower that prevents your clothes from drying. It is a Chinese torture of cold water, created by nature itself to torment travelers. Your psyche breaks down completely long before your frozen, aching legs give out. Snowstorms in winter turn the forest into an insurmountable white trap of certain death. Snowdrifts hid pits and ravines, making every step a game of blind sapper. You could sink waist deep into the snow and simply not have the physical strength to get back out. Today, snow removal equipment clears the roads in a couple of hours for your comfort. Back then, snowfall simply put the entire transport logistics process on hold until spring. Interestingly, people desperately tried to keep warm with alcohol during cold nights. They drank strong beer or ale, hoping to get their hot blood flowing through their frozen veins. Modern science has long proven that alcohol only accelerates heat loss in a weak body. Blood vessels dilate significantly, and a person freezes much faster without even noticing the process. Ancient survival methods sometimes worked in exactly the opposite way, killing their naive creators. The weather was an enemy with which it was absolutely impossible to negotiate or fight. A steel sword will not help you against the icy wind that pierces you to the bone. A sturdy shield will not save you from the monotonous downpour that turns the trail into slippery, sticky mud. The forest simply used the harsh climate as its main and most effective tool of destruction, and people were completely powerless against this ruthless, enormous climatic machine. I see the dancing shadows of trees creating frightening silhouettes around me. In this darkness, it is easy to believe what all medieval people firmly believed. For you, the forest will not be just a cluster of trees, but a dwelling place for ancient demons, evil spirits, and witches. This inevitably leads to panic attacks and real madness among travelers lost in the darkness. Fear of the supernatural killed hope much faster than real physical threats. The medieval mind did not distinguish between the real physical world and the mystical world. If a child disappeared in the forest, no one thought about bears or that he had gotten lost in a swamp. People sincerely believed that he had been kidnapped by elves or goblins for their dark, bloody rituals. Today we watch fantasy movies on a comfortable, soft sofa with a bucket of popcorn in our hands. But for them, the monsters from fairy tales were real neighbors living behind the nearest dark bush. Any strange sound in the night was immediately interpreted as the ominous whispering of forest evil. The hooting of an owl or the creaking of an old tree trunk in the wind drove adults into hysterics. Deprived of normal visual information, the brain begins to invent the most terrifying monsters. Modern psychologists call this pareidolia, when we see faces in random objects. Ancient people called it an encounter with the devil and prayed loudly for the salvation of their souls. In Europe, there was a terrifying belief about the so-called wild hunt. It was a ghostly cavalcade of horsemen racing across the sky and forests on stormy nights. If you accidentally looked at them, you would be taken to the world of the dead forever. It sounds like a cool plot for a big-budget Hollywood mystical blockbuster, but travelers literally fell face down in the mud and covered their eyes with their hands to survive. Witches were another source of paranoid fear in any dense forest. It was believed that they gathered in remote glades to hold their eerie Sabbaths. Finding a flat circle of unusual mushrooms in the thicket meant stumbling upon Satan's dance floor. Modern biologists call this a witch's circle and easily explain it as the growth of mycelium. Inquisitors explained it as black magic and burned random women at hot stakes. When lost, people often lost their minds due to constant and very powerful stress. They began to run in circles, scream wildly, and throw off their warm clothes. Modern medicine knows the term paradoxical undressing when the body is severely hypothermic. But the companions of the madman believed that he was possessed by a real forest demon, and instead of warming the sick man, they ran away from him in animal terror. To protect themselves from evil forces, travelers nailed horseshoes to their carts and carried holy water. The church made a fortune selling protective amulets and blessings for long journeys. It was an ideal business model built on pure human fear of the unknown. Your modern car insurance covers real accidents and unexpected breakdowns. Their road insurance was supposed to protect them from the curse of the old scary forest spirit. The dense forest was often described in treatises as the complete opposite of civilization and God. The city, with its walls and churches, symbolized order, light, and divine protection. The forest, on the other hand, was a realm of chaos, sin, and primitive, uncontrolled animal fury. Leaving the city gates was an act of incredible courage or extreme desperation. You voluntarily left your comfort zone and went straight to the dark branch of hell. Sometimes the fear was so strong that people literally died of a broken heart. A sudden rush of adrenaline when encountering a strange shadow caused a severe heart attack. Doctors of the time recorded this as death from the touch of an evil spirit. You may laugh at their naivety sitting in your safe, modern apartment, but try spending a night alone in the deep forest and your instincts will take over. As a result, supernatural beliefs acted as a powerful amplifier of all other forest dangers. Panic caused people to make foolish mistakes, stray from the trail, and abandon their supplies. Fear consumed them long before the real wolves got to them. The psychological strain was as heavy as the physical exhaustion. The brain became the traveler's worst enemy, conjuring monsters where there were none. Although I am in the wilderness, it is extremely difficult to find safe food here. If you run out of supplies, you run the risk of poisoning yourself with unknown berries. Heavy contamination from dirty water in stagnant forest puddles also poses a huge threat. In those harsh times, a simple case of diarrhea meant almost certain death. The forest looks like a giant supermarket, but half of the goods in it are deadly poisonous. Why can't you just eat delicious mushrooms and nutritious forest nuts? Because this requires a deep knowledge of botany, which an ordinary merchant simply does not have. You eat a beautiful red mushroom, hoping to satisfy your agonizing hunger after a long march. 2 hours later, your liver fails from the powerful natural toxin. It was Russian roulette, where the stakes were your weak digestive system. Obtaining meat without onions and the skills of a professional hunter is also completely unrealistic. Small games such as hares run too fast for a person with a short club. And traps require time, patience, and specific knowledge of animal behavior. Today we get annoyed if a delicious pizza delivery is delayed by 15 minutes. A medieval traveler could walk for 3 days, chewing only tree bark and old skin. The problem with drinking water was even more acute, constant, and dramatic. Drinking from a random stream was a sure way to catch dysentery or cholera. Germs are completely invisible, but they killed people more often than all the wars of that time. Boiling water was difficult due to the constant shortage of dry firewood. Therefore, people preferred to drink low-alcohol beer in which bacteria simply could not survive. Stagnant forest puddles were veritable bacteriological time bombs. Fallen leaves rotted in them, insect corpses floated in them, and parasites multiplied. My digestive system cringes in horror at the mere thought of such a drink. Taking a sip from there meant releasing an army of ruthless destroyers into your body. But when thirst drives you crazy, you are ready to drink even liquid stinking mud. Hunger quickly depleted the energy reserves needed to keep the whole body warm. As soon as the calories ran out, the traveler began to freeze even in relatively warm weather. It's a vicious circle. No food, no warmth, no strength to look for new food. Modern nutritionists recommend intermittent fasting to improve health and lose weight. The Romans and medieval peasants practiced it out of necessity, and they did not like it at all. Attempting to eat the raw meat of a caught animal was also guaranteed to lead to disaster. Without heat treatment, you were getting a dose of dangerous parasites straight into your intestines. Wild animals are riddled with diseases that the human immune system simply cannot cope with. We complain about the doneness of a steak in an expensive, fancy restaurant in the city center. They were happy with a half-raw rat if they managed to catch one in the dark forest. Salt supplies were critically important, but incredibly expensive for ordinary people. Salt helped to preserve meat from rotting on long and very dangerous journeys. Without it, your supplies would turn into a foul-smelling mass by the 3rd day of travel. It was essentially an ancient preservative that ensured basic survival on the road. Losing a bag of salt was worse than losing heavy gold coins. Depletion led to severe hallucinations and a complete loss of spatial orientation. The hungry brain began to conserve energy, completely shutting down critical thinking and logic. People walked straight into swamps because they thought the ground was level. It's like trying to run a modern video game on a broken old calculator. The system simply throws up an error and stops working altogether. The forest was incredibly cruel to those who came unprepared or lost their supplies. It beckoned with an abundance of greenery, but flatly refused to give its resources to strangers. Survival required strict discipline, strict food rationing, and tremendous luck. Death from exhaustion against the backdrop of blossoming nature was a cynical mockery of the universe. Nature was incredibly generous to animals, but absolutely ruthless to humans. I am constantly looking over my shoulder because there is a continuous and very brutal war going on in the forest. It is a bloody conflict between heavily armed poachers and royal foresters. If you accidentally stumble upon the site of their violent clash, you could be killed. The parties will simply remove you as an unwanted witness to their dirty deeds. Or they will mistake you for a lawbreaker and shoot you without further ado. The king's forest guards were not a bunch of good-natured foresters from children's fairy tales. They were harsh mercenaries with unlimited power in their territory. They received a percentage of the bounty for capturing criminals, which made them incredibly aggressive. Modern police are required to read you your rights before handcuffing you. These guys would first shoot a crossbow bolt into your leg and then ask questions. Corruption among the guards reached truly incredible, simply cosmic proportions. They often organized illegal hunting themselves, selling game on the black market. If you were caught doing this, your chances of survival were zero. You would be quietly buried under the nearest oak tree to hide the traces of the crime, and no one would ever look for the poor, nameless traveler who had disappeared. It's funny that foresters' uniforms were often green or brown. This was the first prototype of military camouflage for concealment among dense trees. They blended into the landscape as perfectly as wild forest predators. Modern snipers use similar costumes for invisibility on the battlefield. You could walk a meter away from a guard and not even notice his presence. And a second later, a rough rope was already tightening around your neck. The traveler was caught between a rock and a hard place in this endless conflict. Bandits wanted to take your money, and guards wanted to take your freedom. You couldn't trust anyone, and everyone you met was a potential threat. It was classic paranoia, brought to its absolute maximum by the harsh conditions of the environment. Your nervous system was working at full capacity 24 hours a day. Sometimes foresters forced travelers to work for free for the benefit of the Great Crown. You could be forced to clear trails or drag the carcass of a killed boar to the castle. It was physically impossible to refuse such a request from armed men. Modern taxes are very annoying, but at least they don't force you to carry dead pigs. The monarch's power was evident in every little thing, suppressing the will of the common man. Clashes were always accompanied by incredible cruelty on both sides of the conflict. Poachers who were caught were hanged directly from trees as a warning to all other violators. These gruesome decorations in the forest served as the best warning to casual travelers. I can't imagine a more frightening road sign on my way. It was a vivid demonstration that human life was worthless here. In the end, the presence of guards did not make the forest a safer place for people. On the contrary, the forest guards only added another layer of deadly risk. The state monopoly on violence worked as crudely as a barbarian's club. The forest was a place where civilization showed its ugliest and most cruel face, and the best way to survive was simply to never be seen by anyone. I take each step carefully because dangers lurk beneath the leaves. Deadly surprises lie hidden beneath a thick layer of fallen, rotting leaves. You can suddenly fall into a hidden, steep ravine and break your spine. It is also easy to fall into a deep peat bog or an old hunting pit with stakes. Getting out of there without outside help would be absolutely and physically impossible. Let's start with peat bogs, which were a real curse of medieval forests. Outwardly, they look like beautiful, flat green glades covered with soft moss. But as soon as you stepped on this moss, the ground literally disappeared from under your feet. Modern quicksand in movies is child's play compared to a bog. The bog sucked a person in slowly, unbearably cold, and absolutely silently. The worst thing about a bog is that panic only hastens your death. The more actively you try to escape, the faster you are pulled into the muddy abyss. This contradicts all our basic instincts for self-preservation in the face of danger. You have to lie on your back and freeze to increase your body's surface area. But try to stay calm when the icy slush reaches your chin. In addition to natural swamps, the forest was littered with artificial hidden hunting pits. Peasants dug deep pits, placed sharp stakes at the bottom, and camouflaged them with branches. They were intended for bears or large boars, but they worked perfectly on people too. Stepping on such a roof meant piercing your foot with a dirty wooden spike. It was a medieval equivalent of an anti-personnel mine, forgotten after the end of the war. Falling trees, or widowmakers, were another hidden threat from above. Huge rotten trunks could collapse at any moment from the slightest gust of wind. Modern lumberjacks wear helmets and strictly adhere to safety regulations on the job site. But an ancient traveler could simply have their head crushed by a 2-ton log while resting. It's a pure lottery where you don't even have time to understand what went wrong. Interestingly, experienced travelers used a long pole to check the road. They probed every meter in front of them, like blind people on a busy street. This slowed down their pace considerably, but it guaranteed their survival in the swamp. Today, we get annoyed if we walk down the street slower than usual. But back then, rushing through the forest was the surest way to shorten your life. Forest fires in the summer turned this entire obstacle course into a fiery hell. The fire spread at a monstrous speed, cutting off all possible routes of retreat. Hiding in a swamp during a fire meant being boiled alive in boiling water. Nature left no loopholes for salvation in such critical situations. It was a force of nature that did not negotiate and took no prisoners. As a result, the very terrain of the forest was designed as the perfect killing machine. Every step required maximum concentration and constant visual control underfoot. To relax for a second meant making your last mistake in life. City streets might be dirty and smelly, but at least they didn't try to swallow you whole. The forest, on the other hand, was a living organism that happily digested inattentive travelers. I understand perfectly well that any accident here instantly becomes fatal. This is due to the absolute isolation from civilization and other people. If you break your leg or get a deep cut, you won't be able to find a doctor, and even the simplest everyday infection will inevitably kill you in a few long days. The lack of medicine turned a minor injury into a guaranteed death sentence. In the Middle Ages, there was no emergency service that could be easily called by phone. No helicopters with red crosses, no experienced paramedics with defibrillators. Your health depended solely on the strength of your body and blind luck. Today, an ambulance arrives in 15 minutes and saves millions of lives. Back then, the only emergency aid was prayer before your inevitable demise. Imagine that you were bitten by a common snake while gathering firewood. The poison slowly spreads through your blood, causing muscle paralysis and respiratory failure. Local healers would advise applying warm chicken liver to the wound. It sounds like a bad joke, but it was the actual medical protocol at the time. Of course, it didn't help at all, and the person died in terrible agony. A simple cut from a rusty nail or a thorny branch often caused tetanus. Bacteria entered the wound, and after a few days, your muscles would seize up in convulsions. The person would arch their back, unable to open their mouth, and die of suffocation. Today, we get a simple vaccination once every 10 years and forget about this threat. Romans and knights died from scratches more often than from blows with a heavy sword. A broken leg in the forest was not just an injury, it was a disaster. Without X-rays, bones healed crookedly, turning a person into a cripple for life. If the fracture was open, infection entered the bone marrow and gangrene set in. The only solution was to amputate the leg with a regular saw without the slightest anesthesia. The chance of surviving such an operation in the forest was absolutely zero. Antibiotics did not exist in principle, so any bacteria was deadly. Blood poisoning took the strongest and toughest warriors in a matter of hours. They tried to treat wounds with vinegar, honey, and cheap sour wine. It looks like a recipe for a strange marinade for a weekend barbecue. But oddly enough, these products did have weak antibacterial properties. The psychological trauma from such a journey stayed with a person forever. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not diagnosed, but it broke the psyche. People returned from the forest gray-haired, nervous, and looked at trees with horror. They had gone through hell on earth, and no one could help them. Modern psychotherapists would work with such patients for many years without any guarantee of success. As a result, medical isolation made the forest the most dangerous place on the planet. Your body was a fragile mechanism that broke down at the slightest environmental impact. Without spare parts and an experienced mechanic, this mechanism quickly turned to dust. Traveling through the thicket was like playing roulette with too many bullets in the chamber, and every new step pulled the trigger on your personal health. That is why traveling through medieval forests was a real test of endurance. It was a world where every tree, animal, and person could become your killer. The laws of nature dominated the fragile laws of human civilization. When you left the city gates, you weren't just going on a journey, you were going to war for survival. And it wasn't the strongest who won, but the luckiest traveler. We are used to romanticizing the past through movies, books, and computer games. We think it was a time of great heroes, honor, and beautiful forest walks. But the reality was dirty, cruel, cold, and absolutely unforgiving of mistakes. Every day our ancestors overcame difficulties that would break us in an hour today. They survived this hell so that we could enjoy the comforts of modern megacities. The next time you go for a walk in your local well-maintained park, remember this story. Appreciate the smooth asphalt, bright lights, and complete absence of hungry wolves in the bushes. Civilization has come a long way to make nature a safe backdrop for our weekends. But the ancient, primal fear of the dark forest still lives deep in our genes, because history remembers what it's like to be alone in the wild.